fame. If you win it, comes and goes in a minute. Where's the real stuff in life to cling to?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Boomer Pod podcast. Our guest today is the standout session drummer, Michael Jochum. Welcome, Michael, and thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Larry. It's awesome to be here.
Let's talk about your career in the music world.
Okay.
How did it get started?
Oh, God. Okay. When I was 11 years old, I went over to a friend's house for the ubiquitous kind of play date kind of situation. And I noticed that in his bedroom, he happened to have a drum set up, and I was intrigued. I had no idea what drums were. Although I had listened to music, of course, as a youngster, had no idea about what music was really about, what drumming was about or anything. But I sat down on this drum kit, and after sitting down, I'm talking like immediately, I knew right away that's what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
At that age?
Immediately, I knew it.
That's incredible.
At 11 years old, yeah. Ever since then, I started studying with a private teacher, and my career just started there, basically, learning the fundamentals of my instrument. And then by the time I was 15, 16 years old, I was already working, playing, buying my own clothes as a teenager and driving my car and putting my own gas in my car. It's the only thing I've ever done in my life to make money is playing the drums, and it started at a really early age. I was very fortunate.
Well, that's a wonderful story. Now, did you get started with a band right away, or were you just session drummer?
Yeah, I wasn't really band guy, although I had played up till then for instance, one of my first live performances as a skilled player was if anybody remembers Shakey's Pizza Parlor places, right?
Sure.
So I grew up in Burbank, California, and there was a Shakey's down the street from our house. And at the time I wasn't driving. I was 13 or 14 when I first started playing at Shakey's. And it was typical Shakey's, as you can imagine, banjo player and an accordion player and a drummer. And my dad would drop me off in our 52 Chevy pickup at 8 o'clock at night, and then pick me up at 10:30 when Shakey's closed, because they would have entertainment in the evening. So I did that. And then I played in some other casual bands, as we would call them, like for weddings and for this or that, bar mitzvahs. But really my career started as a studio guy when I was 17. I was 18 years old when I did my first major recording session.
And that was tell me about that.
So my very first real recording session was the theme session for the television series The Love Boat. And some of you boomers out there would probably remember The Love Boat. Even younger people remember The Love Boat because there's been reruns all over the place. Thank God, because I see the little trickling of checks in my mailbox every once in a while, which is nice. But yeah, I started playing. That was my very first recording session. I'll never forget it because I walked into the studio and I had no idea what to expect. I was very green at that point. And I walked in and I figured it would just be me. And because I was used to like me and maybe a piano player and a bass player and a guitar player or something like that, and maybe one horn or something, but it was an entire orchestra. So I walked in on an entire orchestra, literally music stands set up for 100 people they look like little soldiers all set up and stacked on different risers for where you got your violins and you've got your brass section and you got this and you got that. And then of course the rhythm section guys, which are the loudest guys in the orchestra, are all the way in the back. And that's where we were set up. But yeah, that really was the start of it. And my benefactor for that recording session was a gentleman named Shelley Russell, who left us a few years ago, one of the greatest guys, and he recommended me for multiple recording sessions after that. That's how it works anyway.
Okay, you've crossed many music genres. Now you're going to have to help me with this because I'm not familiar with a lot of them.
Sure.
But I'm going to mention them. Nu metal, industrial metal, acoustic, pop rock, synth rock, jazz rock, soul, R&B, and you also played for the Muppets, American Idol, and 25 years with The Simpsons. I'm sure that's not all of it, but that's a good part of it.
That's a pretty good start. I can definitely dovetail on all that and tell you that I've been extremely fortunate in my career. I grew up in a time, and one aspect of the dynamic arc of my career was the fact that grew up in Los Angeles, a recording mecca. There are really only three places, especially in the late 70s, early 80s, when I was growing up and starting to play music. You had Nashville, you had New York, and you had Los Angeles. And if you grew up as a musician in any three of those places and you wanted to make a career out of it, you knew that there was, and I knew this, that there was two ways that I could go. I could either be a session guy, studio guy, or I could be a touring guy. And at a young age, I had a baby daughter when I was 21. I had my first daughter. I knew that I didn't want to be the guy that was on the road all the time and miss out on my daughter's life. I have five kids now, but that was my first daughter. And so I knew that establishing myself as a studio in the studios was the best way to do that. And the best way to make a career out of being a studio guy is being as versatile as possible. So I played each and every one of those genres of music that you named, including nu metal. I was with the band Korn. Some of you boomers may or may not, your kids and certainly your grandkids are going to know who Korn is. And I was vaulted into a whole kind of netherworld of that life, something that I hadn't experienced before, but that was in the 2000s. But before that, yeah, so I was fortunate to play in the house band of the reboot of the Muppet Show called Muppets Tonight. And that was one of my most wonderful musical experiences because we were contracted for a 5-day a week rehearsal. We had to rehearse 5 days a week with the puppets because they would always have a musical guest. So Garth Brooks would come on, or somebody like Paula Abdul would come on, some of these other people. And you would have to rehearse with these guys, with these artists, so the puppets could do their thing. But being able to experience those puppets for the 3 years that I was playing in the Muppets Tonight house band was one of my most memorable music experiences because I was able to watch these puppeteers do their thing. It's remarkable to think these guys are back there and they're underneath the stage and they're manipulating these Muppets and they're doing the voices at the same time. So it was really a wonderful experience. Also, variety television in general. So I did the first 3 years of American Idol, the Kelly Clarkson days of American Idol, and live television. Also did the Joan Rivers ill-fated late night show that she hosted on Fox TV. I did that. I also played on two of the Tracy Ullman shows, the British comedian. She had two different shows. And live TV is the best because it's the best paying. And it means that most normally you'll rehearse at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, have dinner, do the live taping at 7:30. The fact that you are working doing the live TV towards the end of your day means that you had the first part of your day to do other recording sessions. So it's really having your cake and eating it too scenario. Yeah, but live television was the best. And as you alluded to, as far as the genres of music, I'd have to play as a drummer, I'd have to play every kind of music you can imagine with these artists.
Now, I'll be honest with you. I didn't know who Korn was until I started doing research on him because I'm not into that kind of music, metal music, never have been. But I told my two daughters, who were both in their 50s, early 50s, and they went crazy. They both know about it.
Sure.
And they're looking forward to this interview as well.
Oh, good.
Now, help me with this.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between nu metal and industrial metal?
Nu metal is associated with some bands. Korn was originated in 1992 in Bakersfield, and it came out of what you would consider to be the hair metal days. So hair metal would be like Poison, Guns N' Roses, those kinds of bands, those ubiquitous to the 80s. All the way through the 80s. Nu metal came at a time when 1990 came around, so let's say, and then Nirvana took the music business by storm, along with Pearl Jam and some of those other bands in what would be considered the Seattle grunge scene of music. But then nu metal brought a lot of those kinds of musics together in a way And that's why they described it as nu metal. Bands, I'm trying to think of a better example besides, other than Korn, but I can't right now. But Korn epitomized that style of music, wherein like a band like Metallica, let's say, which most people even our age know, was heavy metal. Industrial metal was more of a kind of music that was originated, I would say, more in Europe, especially in Germany, a much more hardcore, industrial sounding music, very heavy, very loud. And don't get me wrong, a band like Korn, when I came to my first rehearsals with that band, I turned to the guitar player in the band. I said, "Boy, this is really loud. It's really loud." He looked at me as, "Hey man, this is rock and roll. This is rock. Put your earplugs in and stand by." And I did that job for all the way through 2010-ish. And that was the point when I thought I was going to retire, because I had made enough money in the music business and I had it. But I did for 5 years. I gave up playing music. I decided that I wasn't going to play anymore. But moving to Colorado, that's a whole nother story. And I got sucked back into the business, but not doing the business as much as being just a musician who wanted to be able to play and didn't have as the kind of considerations I did, having 3 separate families, divorce, and having to make a substantial living in California, where it's very expensive to live.
Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. You went from Korn, and then you also played for Jackson Browne, who I am familiar with.
And most of your boomer audience would be familiar.
Tell me about that transition.
So that was before Korn, and I played with Jackson from 1986 through 1992-ish. I'm on two different records of Jackson's, the Lawyers in Love record and the World in Motion record. One of the greatest songwriters of this or any other century, for sure, and one of the most wonderful people I've ever met. Certainly, terrific individual. And Jackson saw me. We saw each other through some pretty serious storms, serious times in our lives. He was dating Daryl Hannah at the time, if anybody might remember what was going on between the two of them. And that was before cell phones, right?
Yeah.
So we would do a show. I would do a show with Jackson. It was a terrific show. Get on the bus, which is what we do, and start driving out of town. And before you know it, I'd be looking out my bunk window and see Jackson at the phone booth talking to whoever he was talking with. And I knew it was Daryl because he's pointing at the phone, arguing. And we would stay there for a good hour or two while he was on the payphone with his then girlfriend. But a terrific guy. And we made some great music together. And what I always tell people in regards to like playing with Jackson and then playing with Korn, I went wherever the money took me. I really didn't think of the artistic satisfaction from any particular job. I thought, I've got a family to support and this is my job, just like anybody else that has a job and needs to make a living.
Okay, now help me understand this. Do I have this right? 25 years with The Simpsons?
So
how did you do that?
So out of the Tracy Ullman Show, which if anybody has the opportunity to look up the Tracy Ullman Show, it was a fantastic variety show. Comics, and a fantastic person, by the way, just a wonderful lady. If you may remember when she was going to a commercial break, they'd have little snippets of The Simpsons.
Right.
And that was the very beginning. That was the genesis of The Simpsons cartoons. Matt Groening came to Fox and said, "Hey, I've got this great cartoon you guys might want to check out, and maybe you could put it in your show." And sure enough, and it started gaining popularity. And then Fox gave Matt his own show, and it was called The Simpsons. And fortunately, the great composer Alf Clausen was the composer, and Alf insisted on having an entire orchestra for each and every one of the scoring sessions, which at the time wasn't necessarily unusual. But what was unusual was doing it every single Friday night. He had essentially the same cast of characters with some revolving musicians that would come in and out, but the same musicians would come and play the session from 5 to 8 every Friday night. And that went on for almost 25 years until the producers of the show decided, hey, we're spending too much money on the orchestra. And I'm simplifying it way too much, but I think we could save more money by having this guy do it on his laptop in the basement somewhere, and that's what they ended up doing. But I was honored and blessed with that gig for a good almost 25 years. The same, because the thing with The Simpsons is that they would be writing the cartoon, drawing the cartoon, and then making sure the cartoon was all up to the standards that they needed. And then the music would come in last. Alf would be writing music at the very last minute because Matt Groening would be changing this or changing that. The tempo of the show would change, the atmosphere of the show would change. So that's why you had to record the music every week. Many times, like through, let's say, The Love Boat, I also did Happy Days, I did Laverne and Shirley, I did Joni Loves Chachi, I did all of the sitcoms, those sitcoms of the time. I'm on all of those, including some dramatic shows like Hawaii Five-0 and Mannix, and you guys remember all those shows.
Sure.
And oftentimes you would go in and do one session, but that one session would be 5 or 6 different shows because they would cut and dice all the musical cues, is what they're called, and cues into many different shows. You didn't have to have a variety, and the atmosphere wouldn't change as much. Hawaii Five-0 would be the same, Bookham Dano every week. The Simpsons cartoons were a totally different thing on television. And that gave birth to another show that I did called Futurama. I don't know if any of you remember that show.
I don't
A
know.
little more less boomerish and more millennial-ish, probably, maybe in between somewhere. But the same thing, where they would have to cut the music at the very last minute and things would change. It meant that you get a session once a week for each of those shows.
Now, did you do anything else during that 25 years that you worked for The Simpsons?
Sure. Like I said, the luxury of being able doing either live television or a session that was later in the day was that you could do everything else during the course of the day. There was a time in the mid 80s to the mid 90s almost, where I was doing 2 or 3 recording sessions a day, where Jimmy Williamson, who lives right on the front row, who was my equipment guy since 1982. He was my guy for all these years. He's the one that prompted me to buy.
He's a drummer too, isn't he?
And he's a drummer with the Boys of Summer, his Eagles tribute band. He would set up my gear at one studio, and there's no way that I could make it over to another studio to play the session unless he set up my gear at another studio, so I could make it on time, and then in another studio. And that's how I went for a long time. It was an incredibly fruitful time, and I call it the milk and honey days of recording.
Sure.
And things changed over the years, but there was a time when I was doing 2 or 3 sessions a day. Yeah.
Now, this may be difficult to do, but what's your favorite? What was your favorite experience out of all of these genres that you got involved in?
I think Jackson probably stands out as one of my most profound musical experiences in many ways. I think doing the Tracy Ullman show, any live television, I always loved live television. There's a certain immediacy to live TV that you don't get when you're recording, when you're put under the microscope when you're recording in the studio. Although I look at that environment as being my favorite environment, and it's true for live performing as well, is that you've got to be right on the money. And all of that has everything to do with how well you read music, how fast you are, and being on time. I tell people when drummers or any musician comes to me and say, hey, what's the most important thing you could do before any recording session? And when I do clinics, and I'll ask that question. And of course, if it's for drummers, they'll go, oh, tune your drums, something silly like that, or make sure you have brand new drum heads on your drums or new guitar strings or whatever. I said, no, the most important thing you can do the night before a recording session is make sure you have enough gas in your car to make it to the session in the morning. And it's true, because being on time and being professional is everything.
Amazing.
It is. It's everything.
Yeah. Who are you working with now?
So currently, I moved to Colorado in 2002, and between 2002 and 2005, I was going back and forth to Los Angeles, still doing recording sessions there. But what ended up happening was I played on a film soundtrack called Queen of the Damned, and it featured many of the artists that your millennial crowd will recognize, like Marilyn Manson, Korn, Linkin Park, those kinds of artists. And out of that came my audition with Korn. So I played with Korn from 2005 through the latter part of 2009. And then, like I said, after that, I decided to, it's in my book, I decided to not play anymore, and I didn't play for 5 years in Colorado. And then after those 5 years, I started got itching to play again because that's what fuels my soul. Any artist knows, any actor, any stunt person, any person that's in the arts understands that if you don't do what I believe God intended you to do, which is pick up, my drumsticks or pick up that paintbrush or that guitar and play, you just have a hole in your heart. And I felt that way. It took me a while to get there, and it was a good 5 years of not playing, but I was brought out of retirement by a gentleman named Ryan Chris, who is now my dear friend. And I've been playing with a band called Ryan Chris and the Rough Cuts in Colorado for the past going on 9 years now. And we don't make a whole lot of money. It's an original band. People ask me the kind of music. It's a kind of country, but it's much more kind of rock oriented than that. But it's an original band, and unfortunately, original bands just have a very difficult time making a substantial living, particularly when you're on the road and you're paying for your own accommodations and you're paying for your own food. Fortunately, at this point in my life, I don't have to worry about the money. It's just a way that I can still play and feel like I'm reasonably on top of my game, although I'm 66 years old. And in the scheme of things, 66 there's still a lot of wonderful musicians out there that are 66 plus that are playing. I've had some physical issues as well that have put a damper on my progress as a musician, which is frustrating, but at the same time, we all are dealt those kinds of hands and we just deal with them the best we can. But I continue to play with Ryan and Chris and the Rough Cuts. We continue to make records. As a matter of fact, we're just going to be releasing a record of original Christmas music, which is super fun. I've just been listening to the mixes of that, actually. And yeah, so that's where I'm at right now.
Now, LA
Yeah.
to Colorado is a real change, life changer.
It was tough.
Why Colorado? What happened there?
Yeah, so my now ex-wife, her mom was older, and I was at a point in my life where I needed some sort of change because I was frustrated. I was going through some of my own abuse issues, drug and alcohol abuse issues. I've been sober since 2005, but at that time I needed to change to get out of Los Angeles. And so in order to watch over her in her 90s, for me to have a change, I ended up moving. But I'll tell you what, going from Los Angeles to Colorado, it was a huge change. I looked at Colorado, and it's really unfair to say, at that point anyway, as a cultural wasteland compared to Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's right.
It's gotten better over time. I think for me personally, it really wasn't, but that's how I looked at it. I had a pretty indignant attitude, I would say imperious attitude about moving. Oh, I can't play with these Denver musicians. They're way below me. And that was horrible, to be honest, at first. But I started aligning myself with some really great musicians in the Denver music scene. And as far as Colorado, the rest is history, and I've been there ever since.
You have a very distinctive command of our language.
No, I don't know about that.
You do, trust me. Now, how did that come about?
The only thing I've ever been good at in my life, honestly, is playing the drums. The only other, for whatever reason, thing that it seems like I've excelled at is language. And I had been prompted for years to write a couple of books or write a book about my experiences in the music business. Excuse me. And I finally, so I have a few of them. I finally wrote my first book, which is This Week Nothing, which was essentially about my life as a session musician in Los Angeles. That was my first book. The second book was, did I give you the second book?
Yeah,
The Road Never Ends, which was mostly about my life as why did you come back playing music again? And this book details being on the road, staying in substandard hotels, eating substandard food for very little or no money, and why do I do that? And then I have a third book that I essentially put all these books together along with an additional 50 stories. I don't know what the deal is exactly, but I always got A's in English. I graduated high school early, I was a straight A student all through high school. The only reason I think I was a straight A student is because I wanted to get out of high school as fast as possible. My first road gig when I was out of high school I'll never forget it because I was in Montreal, Canada, and I was a Southern California guy, was not equipped, and you boomers will remember this. I don't know if I probably wrote a story about this in one of my books. It was with Ray Anthony and the Bookends. Anybody remember Ray Anthony?
Certainly.
Certainly. And
Thank you.
I was in Ray Anthony's band, and it was a great experience because we would be Ray Anthony and the Bookends would be the house band, let's say we played the Ritz-Carlton showroom in Montreal, freezing my nuts off, honestly. And I didn't even have a winter jacket. I had to go out and buy a parka. And we would be hosting like Pia Zadora, Debbie Reynolds, Don Rickles. Anybody remember Rip Taylor?
Yeah.
The comedian Rip Taylor?
Sure.
Rip Taylor. The list goes on and on. I can't even remember everybody, but that was a wonderful experience. I don't know how I ended up there, but yeah.
Before I forget,
so much.
Tell our viewers how they can get these books.
Yeah, you can message me. Is at this point probably the best way to do it. And if anybody's interested to go to my Facebook page, Michael Jochum, I'm easy to find. I'm the drummer guy on Facebook. I have a pretty broad Facebook following, and just message me and say, hey, I saw you on Larry's show and I'd really be interested in purchasing one of your books, and I'd be more than happy to get you one of the books and autograph it and all that good stuff.
That'll be great. That'll be
pleasure.
great.
Yeah.
And you'll get it too. You'll get it. You've experienced more than your normal share of pain and suffering, as I understand it. What's your secret to survival?
People ask me how I'm doing, so I'll just give you just a brief overview. I was born with a neural tube defect called spina bifida, and I was born in 1958. And in 1958, there was really no surgery for spina bifida except come out of your mother's womb, and then they see, oh, it wasn't even something you could detect early on, and they repair that neural tube defect, and essentially at that point, when they repair your neural tube defect, they did what's essentially a tethering of the spinal cord at the same time, minute cut, so that your spinal cord would grow properly as you grew into adolescence and adulthood. So over time, what happens though, when they would tether this cord, is that it becomes wrapped up in scar tissue. Many spina bifida patients over the years have had to have what's called detethering surgeries. So essentially the neurosurgeon goes in, opens everything up and goes into your spinal cord and with other laser things, other microscopically detether your spinal cord from the scar tissue so that it flows freely in the dura again. But invariably what ends up happening is scar tissue begets more scar tissue. And so I've had one of those surgeries since 2005. I've had eight detethering surgeries. I've been in the hospital a lot. Anyway, so I've had these detethering surgeries to try to release my spinal cord from being entrapped in scar tissue. My most recent surgery was December 28th of 2023, where they tried an experimental surgery where they actually shortened my spinal cord. Very unusual surgery, but indicated for people like me who have had detethering surgeries. It's symptomatic. If it's not symptomatic, if you're a spina bifida patient and you have discomfort, it's one thing, but if it's symptomatic to the point where you have pain and lack of sensation, which is how it manifested in me, then surgery would be indicated. But over time, all these surgeries didn't do anything for me. So this experimental surgery last year was my last hope, and unfortunately it didn't do the trick. So now I have 8-inch rods in my back, and anyway, I won't belabor that point. How do I keep going? When people ask how I'm doing, I say, look, how do you play the drums? Sitting down and playing the drums is one thing. It's like when I sit down and play, I feel like I'm 18 years old again. I think that's a part of it. I feel like I'm just a kid again doing what I love. It's all the other stuff that is the issue, especially being on the road when you're bumping into people and you're walking and all that. But I describe it to people like a shark. I just have to keep on going, or else lest I sink to the bottom of the ocean and die. Like sharks have to keep on moving. So that's how I feel. I just keep on trucking, man.
I'm not a musician and I'm certainly not a medical person, but my question is, how do you deal with the pain and the manifestation of the spinal bifida as a drummer? Now, the drumming, you have to move a lot,
Right.
and your spine is definitely going to be part of that. How does that work?
That's what people ask me. The irony of all of this and the interesting aspect of the fact that I have this disease that debilitates a lot of people, by the way. I'm extremely grateful and fortunate to have had, 5 kids. I have 8 grandkids. My life has been amazing as a musician and as a person. But yeah, I don't know. And it didn't start manifesting in me until my late 30s when it started the pain and the lack of
Oh,
sensation.
okay.
In the same way that I manipulate things down here, because you're talking, it's a 4-limbed occupation.
Yeah.
Everything's moving. It's like driving a car is the same thing. It's just this muscle memory thing that I have that even through the pain and discomfort of having to do it, I can still do it. It'd be different if I was at this point in my life, if I was still doing some very important studio recording sessions where I had to be so on that every take, every time you recorded something meant so much and was that much more important that if I have a bad spasm of pain, all of a sudden I couldn't function, that'd be one thing. But I do everything I can to sort of muscle through these days. That's how, as far as the drumming part of it, that's how I do it.
I've been fortunate in that I've never had any kind of pain at all in my life, never, okay? But I know myself, and if I did, I'd be taking painkillers all the time. Did you have a problem with that?
Yeah, you bet I did. So I went through that, of course, that whole myriad of prescription drugs. The way the pain doctors described it is that they're going to attack the pain on all flanks. There was a time particularly between 2008 and 2011, where I was taking 6, 7 medications at a time. Not necessarily unusual for older folks, maybe, but I'm talking about antidepressants, narcotic pain medication, oxycodone, antidepressant meds, 6, 7 at a time, even. And there was a point, methadone as well, combined with everything. So there was a point where I just said, look, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And I spent 2 years during one of the most difficult times of my life when I was not playing drums and I had already been sober, but the prescription pain medication was still an issue, but attacking on all flanks. And I weaned myself off of all 7 medications in a 2-year period. And to this day, I don't take any pain medication because I look at it this way. And I tell people all the time that when I say that, if it helps you, then God bless you. Go for it if it helps. But for me, unfortunately, nothing helps. And I've tried everything for my pain. And it just, nerve pain, my pain doc at Colorado University in Colorado said nerves have this way. It's like you may find a little relief, but then, and this is exactly what she said to me. She said, but then they have a way of they have fucking with you again. They like find their way in and they'll get you. And that's what I've experienced over time.
What do you consider your greatest accomplishments?
My kids, I have 5 incredible kids, incredible adults. My oldest is 44, 8 grandkids. I can easily say right off the bat, that's as far as my musical accomplishments, I don't know, man. Just being able to trudge that road of sometimes uncertain musical destiny for well over 50 years, I think is an accomplishment in itself. And making a living playing what I love for 50 years. I've never done anything else. And I've been very fortunate and have a lot of gratitude.
Now, I know about the pain and the suffering from the spinal bifida, but what have been some of the biggest career and life challenges other than that you've had?
I think certainly drug addiction and getting sober was a life challenge. I knew when I was done. I have a dear friend of mine who actually I wonder if you saw them, Larry, when Freebo and Alice came and played here at the camp. My dear friend Freebo, Fretless Freebo, as he was known in the 60s, with his partner Bonnie Raitt, singer-songwriter. After my first surgery in 2005, I'll never forget it. I woke up from the surgery and there was my dear friend Freebo standing in the doorway like an angel saying, Michael, you have a choice. And at that point, I embraced sobriety. I haven't had a drink since then. I haven't had and illegal drug since then. I think that's probably one of my biggest achievements as an individual. Hard fought. It took me a long time to get there, but I tell people it's until you're not ready until you're ready, and you're doing it absolutely for you. If that's the road that you're taking. But yeah, I think that was a huge achievement.
Is retirement on the horizon?
I think more about it, and retirement means that I would make my home here in Corona Beach with you. That's essentially what it would mean, because there's no way that I can go back and forth and do what I've been doing in Colorado. And I've been thinking a lot more about that. This is the longest that I've been here at the beach with my beach home. At one time, I've been here for 3 weeks now. And the longer I'm here, the more I think maybe it's time. But then what ends up happening, I go back to Colorado and I play some music, which I will a week from today with my bandmates. And I'm like, no, I got to keep on doing this for at least a while. What I will say is that my retirement, whenever that does happen from not playing my instrument anymore, which is what that would mean, I want it to be on my own terms. In other words, I never want to be in a position where I'm playing a show or I'm doing a recording session and go, boy, I'm not the drummer that I used to be. Or worse yet, my bandmates say, you're not the drummer that you used to be. Maybe it's time for you to retire. That would be horrible for me.
You see that coming?
I see it coming only because of my physical challenges at this point. I'm going to have yet another surgery on January 15th to remove the hardware that I had installed last year, because the hardware has not helped me. And if anything, it's put another layer of pain on top of the pain that I already have. So I see that if anything, that January 15th is going to be of next year, obviously, is going to be, we'll see whether or not it's maybe time to call it. And like I said, on my terms and not on anybody else's terms.
Your life's mix was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Thank you, brother.
Tell us about your heritage.
So my grandparents were French German. My great grandfather German, my grandfather German, my father, and so Alsatian essentially.
Mhm.
Because my parents and my grandparents would always say, Michael, you're not German, you're French, and from Alsace, Lorraine
Right.
in particular. And I actually was able to go to that province, beautiful, between Germany
Yes.
and France one time in my touring. Are you familiar with that area?
I was in Germany for 3 years,
Yes.
the military.
So yeah, French, Alsatian is what my
Mhm.
Jochum is a German name, pronounced Jochum in Germany, obviously, but my parents always insisted that we pronounce it Jochum here, so and probably had something to do with being in the States. Yeah, that's my family history right there in a nutshell. Yeah.
And how about your family?
My mom died when I was 27. She was 47. Yeah, she died very untimely. She had a stroke. And my father died in 2002, had heart disease, lifetime smoker, etc., and just refused to give it up and just passed away. And no brothers and sisters. My parents had no brothers and sisters.
Wow.
My grandparents had no brothers and sisters. Crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is very unusual.
Very unusual. That's why now I have a big family. 5 kids and 8 grandkids. So.
And this is wife number
It's wife number 3.
number 3.
Yeah, Karen's my wife.
I
number
had
3.
2.
As she likes to say, your best wife. Not number 3.
I've met your wife.
I've
met your wife. I've met Karen.
I know you have.
She's quite an individual.
She is quite something. She's the social butterfly to my absolute invert, especially inverted personality, especially being here. I like to be by myself a lot. I enjoy my alone time
too.
here.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah, we both do.
And how about your kids?
Kids are wonderful. 5 kids. Not everybody asks me, are any of your kids musically inclined? Maybe at first they thought about it, but I have a banker's son. I have a nurse daughter. I have a real estate daughter. I have everybody has done really well career-wise, been super successful in their careers. I have 3 grandkids in Colorado. I have 4 grandkids in Colorado, 3 in California, and 1 brand new one in Idaho. Asher is going to be a year old on the 20th.
That's quite a family.
It's a great family. I love it.
Especially for somebody that comes from
I know.
families with no siblings.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
And I'm talking my parents, grandparents, and from what I understand, my great grandparents. Really unusual.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. How would you like Michael Jochum to be remembered?
Oh man, I don't know. Always speaking is truth. I would like to think maybe I have some very strong opinions about a lot of things. Music, certainly. Politics, certainly. I never talk about politics at the beach.
Because I'm not gonna ask you about
Right.
politics.
So it is a subject that shouldn't be breached as far as I'm concerned at the beach. And nor do I talk about music when I'm playing politics when I'm playing music ever.
Yeah,
I don't think the two should mix, and that's just my opinion.
yeah, yeah.
Politics, certainly. I don't know. Ethics, morals. I just have some strong opinion. A guy who had strong opinions and embraced what was essentially his truth. And a good musician, an accomplished musician, I would say. Certainly not in the limelight ever. I never wanted to be in the limelight. That's one of the reasons why I chose playing the drums, because I've always enjoyed being the guy that's behind everybody else, and that's why I can watch everybody.
You're an amazing creature. Absolutely amazing.
Thank you, Larry. Sorry.
What have I missed, Michael? Anything
Oh,
else
man, I
that you'd
think you
like to
covered it.
mention or pitch?
I think you covered it really well. I mean, anybody who's interested in my book, anybody who's interested in hearing more about SB, about spina bifida, and my story about that, I'm proactive on many different fronts in regards to disabilities, etc., chronic pain, any of that kind of good stuff. Please feel free to message me, Michael, Jochum, drummer. I don't think there's any other drummers named Michael Jochum there in cyberspace.
There isn't.
So feel free to look me up. And thanks for having me.
Be well, my
It's been
friend.
great. Thank you,
Be
bro.
well.
Appreciate
And
it.
thank you for the unique insights.
My pleasure. Thank you for a great show.
Say hello to Karen.
You bet I will. Yeah.
Ciao.
Ciao. Thank you guys.
And you will be happy too.